Hi, welcome everybody. My name's Adrian Slatcher. I work within the City Council at Manchester. Just wanting to remind people where Manchester is. On the right-hand map, you can see we're in the northwest of England. The northwest of England is a very populated area and so a very industrial area historically. You may not understand that Manchester is actually one of 10 boroughs, 10 local authorities within the Greater Manchester. As you can see, we're quite going down to the south. We have the airport, which is within the Manchester borough, but the overall urban area is 2.5 million. But in Manchester itself, it's around 560,000, which I think is a good context for this. We'll stay on this slide just for a minute whilst I'll give you a little bit of background. The city's had around 12 years where I would say climate change has been quite high on the agenda. Our first strategy, Manchester A Certain Future, was in 2009. Moved forward 10 years to 2019, and the local authority, the councillors, declared a climate emergency. Making it a really important policy statement is one thing, but it's also important that we actually know what our action plan is going to be. Key to this was following the Paris Agreement and understanding what the science was telling us. And for the city as a whole, so not just the city council, for the city as a whole, we established a carbon budget, which is 15 million tonnes of carbon. To support us in being able to deliver on reducing that number of carbon and to use that budget wisely, we established the Manchester Climate Change Partnership, members of which are responsible for 25% of the city's carbon, and an agency, the Manchester Climate Change Agency, which is a not-for-profit to help support our ambitions. I think we work within the existing Greater Manchester structure. So you may have heard of Mayor Andy Burnham. He's at the Greater Manchester level. So we work with our partners across those 10 local authorities. We've been very successful, I think, at bringing in projects to do things in this area. Sea Change and Zero Carbon Cities, which I'll mention a bit more later on. But we've recently drawn down around 17 million from UK government for public sector decarbonisation. And we are not just about mitigation, we're also about adaptation. We have a project called Grow Green, which is a nature-based solutions project. So if you want to go on to the next slide, please, that'd be great. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about carbon budgets. I'm not a climate scientist, but what I think has been really important is within the city, setting a carbon budget is what enables us to really articulate what the challenge is, the extent of the challenge, but also what do we need to do and when do we need to do it. So we have a target as a city to be zero carbon by 2038. Which is 12 years ahead of UK government's target. And we've worked with the Tyndall Centre at the University of Manchester around our direct emissions. So these 15 million tonnes CO2 I talk about here is, for those who are technically minded, is scope 1 and scope 2. So it covers essentially the carbon that come from our direct activities and from our energy usage. You probably can't see that too clearly, but what I think is really important is that the challenge is with us now. We need to reduce our emissions by at least 50% between 2020 and 25. Next slide, please. So what we did really was build on what we always do in the city, which is we partner with universities, with the private sector, with other public agencies. The partnership is independently chaired. Our own emissions in the city are only 2%. And I think that's quite a small amount, really. But it's our influence which is also important. And also in the UK context, things like our housing associations on this list. We have our hospitals, we have large businesses, including property companies, but also Manchester City Football Club, for instance, who are signed up to this. Across that, we cover 25% of city emissions. The rest of those emissions from people's houses, from business and industry, and from buildings, those are the big challenges going forward. Next slide, please. So working with other cities is not just within the UK or within our local authority and Greater Manchester, it's also around sharing good practice nationally and internationally. Um, so Sea Change is one of the interesting projects we've funded over the last 3 years from URBACT. Part of our sector-based approach, who's signed up to the Manchester Climate Change Partnership, includes smaller players, such as the faith sector, the community sector, and in the case of Sea Change, the Manchester Arts Sustainability Team, which brings together Manchester's many different cultural organisations who are very keen on doing things to reduce carbon and improve the way they operate. And this model has now been transferred to other cities. Then zero carbon cities is basically saying the science is changing, some of the targets that cities have aren't strong enough, and can we work together on setting that carbon budget in line with the Paris Agreement? For ourselves, who've already got that Paris Agreement budget, we are now extending that through our refresh later this year to talk about Scope 3, which is the things we buy and consume, and also about the airport, which is actually jointly owned by the 10 local authorities in Greater Manchester. Next slide, please. I just wanted to give an example of what happens and how long it takes in some ways. We identified about 4 or 5 years ago that we had the opportunity to build on some of the experience of our universities around adapting the city. Manchester is famous for its rain, I think, as well as its football teams and its music. And we have actually built a new park, just outside the city centre, about a mile outside the city centre in Gorton, which is quite a poor area. And this is a sponge park. It's the park that drinks. So we've worked with a lot of different partners to be able to do that. So it's an example, as well as mitigation, i.e. reduce the amount of carbon that we produce and use, but also can we adapt our environment so it's more environmentally friendly, and obviously it's also a lovely park. And so that funding came from the EU's Nature-Based Solutions programme. And next slide, please. So I just really wanted to finish off by, just before I say goodbye, is just talk about what our ambitions are going forward and where our next steps will be. So within the City Council, we have a climate change coordination group, which is actually led by the Deputy Chief Exec. So we have that, not just the political buy-in, which is really important, but we also have the officer buy-in. So that means putting resources, putting a team together, and that's delivered kind of across different work streams. So those work streams include our buildings, our vehicles, and also the way we operate as a city, and also about influence. So the Climate Change Agency that works with us was set up to help galvanise the city, not just ourselves, and that's being expanded this year. It's going to have large community and business programmes. The Climate Change Partnership, which currently is 25% of emissions, we're going to increase that. So we are trying to move forward on a number of different fronts. We also want to have an influencing role. This session is called, towards COP26. That's going to be taking place in Glasgow in the UK this year. The city will have a presence there. We are very interested in aligning with, there's a network called C40 with 40 large cities, and we want to align with what they're doing to make sure that our own targets are in line with current best practice. And there is also something called the Race for Zero, which we've also signed up to. So I think over the next few months, we're going to see more action, if you like, that is visible. And what I think is important for a city, and I'm really interested to hear from our other cities, our debate, is how you actually turn your ambitions, your strategy, your policy into a set of actions that people can actually see.